He was once the golden boy of Europe, a warrior king with the world at his feet. Henry VIII ruled with charm, strength, and unshakable authority. But beneath the glittering crown, a storm was brewing. Driven by obsession, consumed by fear, and tormented by the ghosts of his past, England's most infamous monarch began to rot from within. His body collapsed. His mind followed. And in his final days, the court whispered not of power, but of horror. This is not the tale of a great king. It is the slow, terrifying unraveling of a man who once dared to call himself a god on earth. Henry VIII's reign began with promise, thunder, and brilliance. At just 17, he inherited the English throne after the death of his father, Henry VII. The people rejoiced. Here was a king unlike any they had known in generations. He was tall, strong, with broad shoulders and a confident gaze that lit up his court. He jousted with the best knights, hunted with tireless energy, and danced with grace. He spoke fluent Latin, wrote music, and surrounded himself with scholars and poets. The court of Henry VIII became a beacon of Renaissance culture. He was a man of the future, and England believed itself reborn. But even then, the seeds of fear and ambition were sown. The death of his older brother Arthur had placed the crown on his head. Yet Henry believed, in his heart, that God had chosen him, that he was favored by heaven. When he married Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, it seemed a dynastic match sealed in both blood and divine will. But fate would betray him. Catherine failed to give him a surviving son. Each stillbirth, each lost child, chipped away at his patience, then his sanity. He had a daughter, Mary, but in Henry's mind, only a son could secure his legacy. Over time, his hunger for a male heir would push him into the abyss. As the years passed, the glory began to fade. Henry's body, once athletic and lean, began to swell with age and excess. Food, drink, and the weight of rule took their toll. By the time he met in Boulogne, he had already grown tired of Catherine, and was young, sharp-witted, and full of fire, everything Catherine no longer was. Henry's obsession with her spiraled into a crisis that would change history. He broke from the Catholic Church, declaring himself head of the Church of England. All for a woman, all for the hope of a son, but and would disappoint him, too, giving birth only to Elizabeth. And for that, he had her beheaded. His need for control had become lethal. His charm, once magnetic, was now fused with violence. By the early 1540s, Henry VIII was no longer the king of Europe's admiration. His once golden hair had turned white. His body was grotesquely bloated, so large he could no longer mount a horse. A mechanical hoist was built to move him from his bed to his throne. His legs were eaten away by ulcers, deep, festering wounds that refused to heal. Physicians packed them with herbs and cloth, but the pain never ceased. The smell was unbearable. The king, England's once proud lion, now carried with him the scent of decay. Servants came and went in silence, avoiding eye contact. His meals were wheeled to him in silence. His groans echoed through Whitehall Palace like the growls of a wounded beast. But worse than his physical torment was what happened to his mind. Once brilliant, his thoughts turned erratic. He suspected everyone. He feared betrayal behind every door. Advisors who had once been friends now tread with terror. At court, one mistake, one wrong word, could lead to arrest or worse. It was in this poisoned air that Catherine Parr, his sixth wife, fought to survive. Catherine Parr was unlike the others. She was educated, devout, and politically astute. She had no illusions about her marriage. She was a nursemaid as much as a queen, dressing his wounds, reading scripture aloud, and pretending to soothe a soul already consumed by bitterness. She believed in Protestant reform, but cautiously. Too cautious, it seemed, for the factions circling her like vultures. Conservative courtiers, eager to see her fall, whispered into Henry's ear. They accused her of heresy, of denying the sacraments, of placing heresy in the king's household. And for a moment, Henry believed them. He signed her arrest warrant in silence. Catherine, however, was no fool. She caught wind of the plot and acted quickly. That evening, She visited Henry in his chambers and threw herself at his mercy. She claimed to speak of religion not to teach him, but to learn from him. She called herself his humble student, his loyal servant, his devoted wife. Flattered and reassured, Henry kissed her forehead and rescinded the warrant. The next morning, when the guards arrived to arrest her, he waved them off with laughter. Catherine had survived a dance with death, but she knew how close she had come to the axe. In those final years, Henry lived surrounded not by joy, but by shadows. Haunted by what he had done to the women in his life, and Boleyn, Catherine Howard. He saw their faces in his dreams. His second wife, accused of adultery and incest, beheaded by his order. His fifth wife, just a teenager, executed for flirting with other men. The blood on his hands would not wash away. He ordered endless prayers. He clutched relics. He begged God for forgiveness, even as he continued to kill. At night, the halls of the palace grew still, save for his cries. Some swore they heard him whisper their names. Others claimed he talked to the dead. Priests were brought in to perform blessings, but nothing eased his guilt. His eyes were distant. His body throbbed with pain. The light had left his spirit. Henry's court became a place of fear. Where once there had been music and feasts, now there was silence and suspicion. The laughter of courtiers had turned into hushed conversations in shadowed corners. Every noble knew the truth. The king was dying, but no one dared to say it aloud. The man who once ruled with golden splendor had become something else entirely. A dying beast, lashing out with whatever strength remained, dragging everyone around him into the depths of his decline. The year was 1546, and the fires of Henry VIII's wrath had not yet burned out. Though his flesh had turned against him, his mind, however twisted by paranoia, remained sharp enough to wield one final round of executions. The king, once known for his charm and statesmanship, had now become a man whose signature meant death, and whose friendships ended not in farewells, but on the scaffold. Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk, had once been among Henry's most trusted nobles. A battle-hardened general, a proud aristocrat, and the uncle to two of Henry's queens, and Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Norfolk had always understood the razor's edge of favor at court. He had survived the downfall of both nieces. He had navigated religious conflict and palace conspiracies. But in Henry's final year, no one was safe. Henry, increasingly distrustful of old power, turned on the Howard family with ferocity. Norfolk's son, Henry Howard, known as the Earl of Surrey, was a poet and soldier, gifted with words and bloodline. But Surrey's pride became his downfall. He bore the royal arms of Edward the Confessor in his own heraldry, a bold move that could be interpreted as a claim to the throne. Henry, ever fearful of usurpation, seized upon this detail with lethal speed. Surrey was arrested and charged with treason. In truth, it was not about symbols or armory, it was about control. Henry would not die, leaving potential rivals free. Surrey's trial was a farce. He was denied a proper defense, and evidence was shaped to fit the crime. On January 19, 1547, he was dragged to Tower Hill and beheaded. His father, the Duke of Norfolk, followed quickly. Sentenced to death, he awaited his turn in the Tower. But fate twisted strangely that night. On January 28th, before dawn could rise and the axe could fall, Henry VIII died. Norfolk's execution was cancelled. The king had died just in time. Yet the message was clear. Henry's final weeks were not about justice or law. They were about vengeance, about securing the crown's future at all costs, about ensuring that his legacy would not be undone by the noble blood he so often feared. Inside Whitehall Palace, death came slowly. Henry lay in his vast bed, surrounded by the smells of rot and medicine. His legs had turned black in places. His flesh wept with infection. Every touch caused a wince or a growl. The once mighty king, who had commanded armies and defied the Pope, now groaned in a cage of dying flesh. Physicians applied poultices and muttered prayers, but none expected recovery. The royal attendants rotated daily, terrified of being held accountable for the monarch's suffering. Henry refused to allow anyone to mention death in his presence. To speak of it was treason, yet it lingered over the court like a storm. The air grew heavy with anxiety. Nobles jockeyed for position. Who would rule next? Would Edward, the frail boy king, ascend smoothly, or would civil war follow? Henry had refused to name a Lord Protector. His will, dictated to scribes, was vague and deliberately open-ended. He had trusted no one, not even in death. On the night of January 27th, 1547, the king's breathing became shallow. His eyes rolled beneath his swollen eyelids. The court summoned Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to administer last rites. But when Cranmer arrived, Henry was slipping beyond words. He could no longer speak, could no longer raise a hand. Cranmer took his limp fingers in his own and asked if he trusted in God. The king squeezed once. It was his last act. Within hours, his heart stopped. Yet no one announced his death. Not immediately. The courtiers waited in silence. Some claimed they were buying time to ensure a smooth transition for Edward VI. Others whispered they were afraid to be the one who declared the godlike king dead. For 2 days, his body lay in secret, as the nobles prepared the political theater to follow. Then, word spread. The great Lion of England was gone. Henry's corpse was so bloated it would not fit into the coffin. As it made its slow journey from Whitehall to Windsor, legend says it began to seep. Black fluid leaked from the casket. The stench of death clung to the road. At Sion Monastery, the coffin rested overnight. And there, in what many believed a moment of divine judgment, dogs were found licking the trail of decay that had spilled from the king's sarcophagus. Clergy recalled the prophecy of a Franciscan friar who once said Henry would die as King Ahab had, and that dogs would lap his blood. The story spread like wildfire. Even in death, Henry could not escape the consequences of his reign. His funeral was grand, as befit a king of his stature. Cannon fire boomed across the Thames. The nobility followed in black robes. But beneath the solemn ritual, there was unease. He had left behind 3 children: Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each a figure shaped by his cruelty, his ambition, and his violent reign. England itself was fractured. The church had been torn from Rome, the monasteries destroyed, the economy strained. And at the heart of it all lay Henry's legacy, a nation both empowered and scarred, reborn and broken. Edward, just 9 years old, would inherit the crown. A sickly boy, he was brilliant but fragile. His council of regents ruled in his name, each maneuvering for power. Protestant reforms swept forward, accelerating Henry's break from Rome. But Edward's reign would be short. He died young, leaving the throne to Mary, Henry's Catholic daughter. And from her would come flames, literal ones, as she sought to undo what her father had built. Then came Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who would restore stability and forge the golden age of English power. Each of them, in their own way, bore the weight of Henry's actions. Each bore the blood that had bought the crown. The man who had married 6 times, destroyed thousands, broken a nation from its faith, and ruled for 38 turbulent years was now silent. His tomb lies in St. George's Chapel beneath the choir, his name engraved in stone, beside Jane Seymour, the only wife he claimed to have loved. Yet the space is empty of grandeur. No great statue, no golden tribute, just a name and a date. Fitting, perhaps, for a king who spent his life carving his will into history, only to leave behind shadows, scars, and the terrible reminder that even a man who ruled like a god must, in the end, face judgment like any other.
Ooh.